Welcome to Leadership Live. I'm Daphna and this is a podcast for leaders like you who want practical tips to apply in leading your business, your people, and yourself. Now, I know that leadership is a skill that can be learned, and this podcast is about doing just that. Every week, I'll talk about what really works. You'll learn to shift your mindset and practice from being good at what you do to getting great at leading people who are good at what they do so that you can get the business results that you want. Whether you're a first-time manager, entrepreneur, or seasoned executive, you're at the right place. This podcast takes you from talented expert to extraordinary leader. So get ready to master your mindset, inspire your team, and elevate your business. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Live podcast. And today we are talking about interesting conversations. I like having interesting and useful conversations, but useful for me is a result of interesting because we need to start with sparking that level of interesting. And I guess this is why I'm in my line of work, because I coach people to find meaning and come alive and create the impact that they want. This is what helping leaders become extraordinary means to me. And today I want to talk about what I've learned from hundreds of conversations I've had with CEOs and executives I've spoken to over the years. Some landed up being clients and others didn't. Some conversations were interesting while others weren't. But one thing is key for me, and that is that I want to have conversations that create an impact. It is my goal to have people leave our conversation having gained something, whether it's that they remember something about themselves or learn something new, whether they get an idea to implement or something to think about. Anything that creates a new way of thinking that can move them forward in some way is really important to me. That's what it's about for me. So I do a lot of what I call intro conversations. They last between 30 to 60 minutes, and I get to talk to CEOs, business owners, and really get to understand more about their business, who they are as a person, and some of their challenges that they're facing at that moment. It usually starts with a CEO telling me a little bit about their history, the business that they're in right now, and how they got there, and how well things are going for them. They talk about their challenges, and even when they do talk about these challenges, sometimes they'll couch them in ways that make them look not so bad. You know, it's kind of normal for the business, the times that we're in right now, the impact of COVID and the pandemic that we're in, and really trying to make the best of a situation, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't lend for an interesting conversation. It doesn't allow the conversation to get real and get deeper. So this is what I start to do. I start delving a little, and I ask them to either tell me about their dream or their wish for the business, or sometimes about the biggest problem or their challenges or what's really holding them back from where they want to be. And then I listen. And what I think about then is I think about what they're telling me, and I ask myself, what are they not saying? What else is going on here? And when I ask them about that, that's when the conversation starts to get deeper. And for me, that's when the conversation gets interesting. They're much more engaged, as am I, and we really can start to uncover or, peel off those layers of the onion, in Shrek's language, getting deep and getting to the essence or the core of what's going on. So I'd like to share an example with you, because just the other day, I was having one of these intro calls with a CEO who was clearly at the top of his game. He had his objectives in place. He knew what his goals were. He had a plan. He had a strategy, and he had a few different ways of making things happen so that he can meet his financial targets for the year. He certainly knows how to get things done, and he was on track. He was doing what he needed to do. He was experiencing some challenges, especially, because of the COVID situation, world at pandemic. So some projects were stalled. But even as he was telling me this, I felt like this was a story that he had told many, many times before. And something for me was missing in the way that he was speaking. So the first thing I'm going to say is he spoke a lot. And I'm going to pause my story here just for 1 minute and say to all of you, please pay attention to how much you are speaking when you have a conversation. Yes, I know that there's a lot to say, and especially when you're meeting someone for the first time and you want to really give a good sense of your background, and especially with business conversations, we really want to give the whole context or the whole story. I've also spoken to so many salespeople who are so excited to get their story out that they're talking and talking and talking and really diving into this major monologue and not paying attention to how engaged the person they're speaking to is. Are they really bringing them into the conversation, or have they left them way behind? Now, we know our attention span is short, and a monologue of achievements or products or services or instruction is never going to be great. You're going to lose people. People's eyes start glazing over and they're thinking about something completely different. So please pay attention. Keep your stories or your introductions or whatever you're talking about, keep them in short sound bites. Pause between what it is that you're saying and allow the person to make a comment in between. And if the person isn't making a comment in between the person you're talking to, then ask a question or say, how does it sound to you so far? Or do you have any questions for me at the moment before I continue? Pause in between what you're saying. Watch out for those long monologues. I can tell you that in many of my intro calls, I've sometimes timed it that we could go for 10 minutes of a monologue before the person pauses, or sometimes I just interrupt with something. And I notice this. As a coach, I definitely notice it. I check if it's a pattern, because if it's a pattern and if we've established good rapport, I will definitely give some feedback about that. Sometimes I will interrupt and, if I feel that it's appropriate, I will mention it. But usually at some point of the conversation, if it is happening a lot, I will definitely give feedback, because I think it's really important for self-awareness around conversation, influence, and engaging the people that you're talking to, that you know that you're actually being heard. And when you go on for too long, you're really, really not being heard. So one more thing about speaking a lot is that it is also a sign of a story that's been told many times before. So when it comes to the conversations that I like to have with people, I don't want to hear the story that you have told many, many times before. I actually want to hear what you haven't told before. I want to hear the stuff that you're not speaking about, because as a coach, this is where we can do our work together. But I get that not everyone is in that space, and that's okay. But still, if you want people to hear what you have to say, if you want to have good, engaging, impactful conversations, this is the first point that I will make, is notice if you've been talking for too long. Put pauses into your talking, into your whatever it is that you're expressing, and make sure to bring the person in so that they're really hearing what you're talking about. Okay, so going back to my intro call that I mentioned with the CEO who was telling me all about his business and the various things that they do, multi-layered business. A lot was working well and a lot was on track. Some things were stalling, but I had a feeling that there was something else going on, something that he wasn't really talking about. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time. I was listening and taking it in and really asking myself, what's happening here? And I asked some more questions of him as well. And I realized that he was telling me a lot about the things that he knew how to do, the things that came easily to him. And that's where his focus was in terms of business development. But I didn't get a sense of what was at the heart of the business, or what this business meant to him, or where he kind of fitted into the whole thing. So it felt to me like he was still searching for something. And I mentioned that. And that's when he said this: do you know what would really get me going? Why I get out of bed every morning? It's to see my product, my specific design, getting bought by people and serving a specific need. And actually, that was not what his current business was doing. And that's when I said to him, you know what? Now the conversation got interesting. Up until now, I didn't have a sense of who you are within all this activity that you were doing and that you were busy with. But now I'm starting to see a little bit more of that. And the truth is that this happened 40 minutes into our conversation, and sometimes it can take even longer to get to the heart of the matter. But when we get there, there's an instant connection. Firstly, of me all of a sudden being engaged in his story because it became real, it got deep. And secondly, he was actually connecting more to himself and what means more to him. And that is when it started to get interesting. That's when we could question further and see, well, where does this conversation want to go? And he began to speak about what connects him to a sense of purpose, what's holding him back from going for it, and what scares him and what motivates him. And we had a really, really great conversation from there. So what I want to say with this example is I'd like you to think about the conversations that you've had that have left an impact on you. What was it about those conversations? What were you left with? How much did you get real in those conversations? How much do you get real in conversations in general? How much of those great conversations do you have in a week, a month, a year? And what does it take to have those kind of conversations? So I'm going to give you some tips about how to take your conversations to that level deeper and have a real impact. Not the ones that go, yeah, that's interesting. Tell me more about what you do, or tell me more about this or that. It's actually about asking questions that are more real. Maybe the ones that begin with why. What drives you to do that? Why are you focusing on that? Why is this exciting? Why is this scary? Why are you not doing that? So this is really important because I'm trained to listen. This is part of my skill set, but most people aren't. And if we're having the kinds of conversations that are just not that interesting, that are just being a regurgitation of things that we've said over and over in the past, we're not learning anything new. And people find it really difficult to listen. It means that you're actually losing your listener and you're not having the impact that you want to have. So I want to give you another example that I come across a lot. And this one's at a dinner party, okay? Post-COVID with social distancing, small groups and all of that. And you meet someone new and you ask the typical question of, what work do you do? And I find that I often ask this question and I hear an answer like this: I'm in high tech. So I'm thinking, okay, that doesn't really tell me much. So I continue and ask a little bit more and go, okay, so what do you do in high tech? And they'll say, I work at a company that develops software for this or that reason. I go, okay. Or maybe they'll give me the company name. I go, okay. Still doesn't give me much information. So I'll go, well, what do you do there? And they'll go, I'm in the finance department. I still don't know what this person does or what his role is, his or her role is. So I might delve even more and go, well, what role or what is it that you do exactly? And at this point, I'm thinking, this conversation's really going nowhere. I haven't really learned anything about this person and really, honestly, not that interesting. Now, since I'm a coach and sometimes I like to play with people and well, not play with people, but play with things like this, play with my conversations, I'll sometimes make a joke about that and I'll say something like, that doesn't really tell me much. How much do you love your job or something like that? I do try not to put the person on the spot if it's not in a client coach situation. But I do wonder to myself, why is the question of what work do you do often such a difficult one to answer? Now, I know that entrepreneurs get the whole elevator pitch idea. It's kind of drummed into us, business owners who are running their own businesses and who are involved with various aspects of that, including sales, will always work on what is that elevator pitch? What is that one sentence that describes your business, the work that you do in a way that gets people interested and wanting to know more? And it's always a work in progress, and many entrepreneurs do find it difficult to do. But I think that so many people who work in companies, even if it's not your own business, I find that they often can't talk about what they do in a way that is exciting or explains what they do so people can understand and, yes, have an interesting conversation as a result. I think being able to express what work you do is important whether you're in your own business or not, or working for someone else. And what I found is that actually there are always two conversations that are going on at the same time. The conversation out there, which is the words that we're actually saying, and the conversation is in our head, which is what are we really thinking as we're having this conversation outside of our head. We may not always be aware of the two conversations, but they are definitely rolling at the same time. We actually have a conductor inside our head that directs the words that go out and the words that stay in. So maybe while we're talking about our work, we may be thinking, oh, such a boring job, I'd rather talk about anything else. Or we may be thinking, I don't really want to have this conversation, I don't really want to talk to this person, let me get it over with as quickly as possible. Or we may be thinking, how can I sound really clever, really interesting, but those are rarely the things that actually make you sound clever or interesting. So I would invite you to, next time you're at a dinner party, notice what people talk about when you ask them what work they do. Notice if they are actually telling you what they do. And if you feel like it, ask a few more questions about it. Try to make it interesting. So here's what I want to leave you with today. If you want to have an impact or lead with influence, think about these 4 tips. First is, make it your goal to make every conversation count. Either be interesting or leave the conversation with something that you've gained or the other person has gained. So think about how you can make every conversation count in some way. The second thing is, don't do monologues. Break up your own talking with pauses, ask questions, get commentary in from the other person, let the other person get some words in. Tip number 3 is get real. Talk about the things that really matter. Get to the heart of it. And tip 4 is ask questions that help the other person get real. Think about what they're not saying. What are you curious about? What could make the conversation really interesting? You'll see it does take a little bit more effort than we used to, but it's worth it, because then you will leave the person you're talking with something worth remembering and thinking about, and you will also leave with something that you've gained. The biggest compliment anyone can give me is that I've given them something to think about. And recently, a client sent me a birthday gift with a note that said, "Thanks for constantly provoking my thoughts." Best compliment ever. That's what I love to do. So if you'd like to have one of those thought-provoking conversations with me, head on to my website at daphnahorovitz.com and schedule a time for us to talk. And in the meantime, stay healthy, stay sane, and keep things interesting. And this wraps up another episode of Leadership Live. Thank you for joining us today. You can head on to my website at daphnahorovitz.com, where you can download many resources, including a chapter of my book that will show you how to get through tough times and define a big vision for your leadership and your business. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, and I'd be even more grateful if you'd share it with a friend, leave a review and a 5-star rating so that I can continue to reach and support leaders just like you. Tune in next week to Leadership Live, where talented people become extraordinary leaders.